Record. Brad, welcome to Nova Scribes. It's great to have you. And over to you for building trust, building culture.
Thank you, Brian. Thanks for having me. So this was tonight I want to talk about a meeting I very often run, but really when you're going to run a meeting, like you run a meeting for a purpose. And I often think of it almost as marital counseling, these meetings that I sometimes get called into, that they started as agency relation meetings between the agency and the clients. And then very quickly it became obvious that sometimes just the clients need them for themselves. Sometimes we need it for ourselves, especially if you've got two divisions working together or a co-promote, or Andrea's laughing because we've done every one of those, right? Uh, one of the things that often I find interesting is how shocked people are when I go, like, it's just a question of culture, because they think of it as bagels on Monday. And so we're going to talk a little bit about like what we mean by culture in a very sort of functional, operative way, and just how you can view working culture as it's just a set of patterns and practices within which you can optimize, or forget optimize. You can take the worst dysfunction out of it fairly easily just by identifying it, right? Sometimes it's as simple as that. So I'll just go straight in. And what good looks like tonight is you'll walk away with a very simple operative definition of working culture, right? So we'll get there. You have a clearer idea of the granularity of culture. So things like daily habits and practices define culture a lot more than like freedom and liberty, which are conceptual but non-operational. Working culture is much more defined by the floor than the ceiling, right? So what that what that really means is it's what you put up with is what you get, right? You can talk all you want about collaboration, you can talk all you want about who we want to be, but if you actually allow somebody to be disruptive, then you're none of those things. You're just disruptive. And the last one is this is true in any relationship, right? It's not the big stuff, it's the little stuff. And there's this old expression, it's not the mountain that breaks you, it's the pebble in your shoe. It's the little irritations that usually set people off. And they're the things that actually make working culture miserable sometimes. And then the last thing is, what do we really mean by trust in the context of work, right? And how to build it, because all of this comes down to trust a little bit. If I don't trust you to do anything that you say you're going to do, we don't have a working culture. We don't have anything at all in common. We're just waiting to see the other one fail. And hopefully we'll have a little fun. And we can always do that at my expense. So now who I am, I'm a linguist. Now I think has everybody, we kind of did our favorite beat. So I was going to ask everybody for a quick introduction, but there's just a handful of us. So I assume you're all working professionals in some form of advertising and communications. Is that fair?
Or facilitation, instruction, coaching, consulting.
Coaching,
Yeah.
yeah, working with people. Yep. Okay, perfect. So hopefully like this will sort of resonate to everyone, because I think it has a little of all of that, right? So myself, I'm a linguist. Now, what's a linguist, right? Well, one, it's a student of language structure, form, and use. So that can be everything from like grammar, remember diagramming sentences, to like child language acquisition. If you have kids, when they go from the one word to the two word phase and stuff like that. It can be philosophy of language. What does it even mean to think? Can you think without language and stuff like that? In my case, it's I rely on formal representations and constructed heuristics around what I would say is culture, right? I look at interactional social dynamics of language and use. When I first met Brian, I talked to him about the difference in communicative patterns between people from the upper Midwest and New Yorkers. New Yorkers tend to overlap each other's conversations, and people from the Midwest and Scandinavia tend to wait. And it's why people from the Midwest find New Yorkers very pushy, and it's why people from New York find Midwesterners a little dull sometimes, because they're both kind of waiting for the other one to tune in with them. That's just a social habit. You could do it either way. There's no right or no wrong, right? In the context of work, though, what you find is as you study language, what you're really learning about is culture, right? Like who gets to talk, when, where, and how, and why. I studied medical discourse for a long time, and like who has the right to introduce a topic and those sorts of things, which has a lot to do with work, actually. And then the last thing is you actually have to have a beard. So the way you know I'm no longer an academic linguist is I shaved my beard, right? Because the two
That's
guys in the
tragic.
middle, what?
That's tragic.
It is a little tragic. The two guys on either side of me, they still work in academia, and they still have glorious beards, but I lost mine a little while ago. So And just for context, it's about 100 degrees in that photo, and we're all in black robes. So not one of us was happy, but we were done. Um, so what is culture? That's not a rhetorical question, right? I'm going to build this around three questions. So there's not many of us, so this is good. Like, what is culture?
I would say it's a mix of every single thing that's on that wheel right there.
Okay, I'm going to be honest. I'm going to tear this wheel apart just in a minute. I picked this because it has a lot of what people think of as culture, and it's not, none of it's wrong, right? But
Mm,
for example, language is a behavior, rituals are a behavior, customs are a behavior. So one of the problems I have with wheels like this is what's the difference between behavior and rituals, customs, and language, which are also sort of forms of behavior. But yeah, it definitely captures all those things.
In chat, Laurent said culture is dynamic.
Okay,
And
totally true.
I
My issue
personally
with
think
this
that,
wheel,
go ahead.
the issue with this wheel that I have is it feels like it's very codified, and I think culture is something to be experienced and a little bit more active. So that's the difference I'm finding. But I don't have anything beyond that to articulate.
It's a living thing. Okay, go ahead, Brian. You were going to say something.
Yeah, I tend to think that culture is sort of an amalgamation of the personalities, preferences of the individuals who are part of the organization.
Okay, good one. Yep. And I haven't even said work culture yet, right? Like P&G has a culture, America has a culture, North America has a culture.
I was just going to ask the exact same question.
Well, so I mean, what would it mean if the word has currency in all of those contexts? What is it?
Mm,
The
I think Laurence wants to say something.
She does. I see your hand up, Laurence. So, Priya, I just wanted to see, did you have an answer for that? Like it is,
I
yeah,
do, Brad. I work in change management and corporate communications. So culture is something that we study in order to understand the organizational capacity and readiness for change. So for us, culture is understanding the beliefs and mindsets of teams in different organizations, and
I think
understanding.
beliefs.
Yeah.
So we've got beliefs, mindsets. Laurence, you wanted to say something. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So you're talking to a former anthropologist today. And so what came to mind straight away was, Clifford Geertz's definition of culture. That's exactly what came to mind right
Yep.
now. So I could read it for everybody else. And this is Clifford Geertz. I mean, I think this was in the 40s or 50s. I can't remember the date exactly, but it was in the interpretation of cultures. And so culture is defined as a system of inherited conceptions expressed in symbolic forms that allows people to communicate, perpetuate, and develop their knowledge and attitudes about life, ultimately imposing meaning and making the world understandable.
Yeah. It's a mouthful, right? And even that, like people argue, and he's one of the like leading lights of this sort of thing. The answer is everyone was right. Okay. Culture is famously difficult to define, but we all kind of know it when we see it. And one of the problems when we talk about, I kind of like plunged us into this one, and I'm sorry, but one of the problems is people talk about workplace culture. Very often they don't have an operative definition. They just say things are going wrong, right? And as Priya said, like it's beliefs and attitudes. It's a lot of things though. And one of the challenges we have, as we could be talking about material culture, right? Like when you study ancient civilizations, you look at what their artifacts were, what was left behind. But we have material culture too, right? This is part of material culture. When you're allowed to have a phone, do you find, excuse me, do you find people communicating via phone in their meetings? Well, that's part of culture, right? If you tolerate that. So there's some places where phones are forbidden during meetings and other places where the boss will say, hold on, I got to take this. And then everybody has permission to just be on their phone the whole time. I frequently start meetings with there's no such thing as there's no such thing as multitasking. There's just divided attention. And so,
Mhm.
you're trying to people not to do that, but that is form of culture. And that's probably a little bit different than what Priya is talking about, because from a change management standpoint, you're really trying to find out a very specific set of answers to a very specific set of questions, which is what are the beliefs and practices and capabilities of this organization to adapt, and what's going to get in our way, right? And so the one thing I want you to think about is the definition of culture is very, very big. I mean, another one is the learned system, the learned matrix of beliefs, behaviors, rituals, and whatever that, and then it goes on, right? Like basically you've got a family culture, you've got the culture of the religious institution you might go to, whatever social class you belong to, whatever town you grew up in. There's a series of nested sort of identities and culture, and it becomes very hard to unpick it if you just go culture. I think a very good operative definition for work, right? And this is a lot of what we're talking about tonight, is working culture is how we organize ourselves to achieve common goals. And every society has that, right? So this is, I'm not going to trick you, right? This is an Amish barn raising, and I think it was 1940, it could be 1920. They do it that same way now, right? That's one of the things about the Amish is they try and continue certain practices of communal work and living because they believe that that's very important. So that's the other part about culture that's really important. It's not so much what people do, very, very important, but what they think they're doing when they do it, right? So when the Amish build a barn, I've never been to an Amish barn building. I've never personally done an ethnography of the Amish, but I have been around intentional Christian communities quite a bit. And I can say if the Amish are anything like the Bruderhof or the Hutterites, what they believe they're doing is strengthening their own community and reinforcing this idea that we work together and we live together and we benefit together. So they're not just building a barn. There's a ritual aspect to it of we work together. You'd be amazed how much work is ritual, right? And people study things like, do you say hello every time you pass in the hallways, or just the first time in the morning, or never, right? So if Andrea and I ran into each other at Havas, we'd say good morning. Would I say hello to her the next 10 times I walked past her in the office during the day? Probably not. That's the kind of culture we're from. But sometimes somebody will, and sometimes somebody won't even say hello at all. Those probably aren't really important for what Priya's doing. But they're very important if you want to learn who likes who and you want to write a sociogram of who's going to lunch with whom and trying to connect a network of influence. And if what the complaint was that the office actually has a sort of shadow hierarchy, you'd really want to look at who's saying hi to who. So culture manifests in a lot of ways. What I will do in these meetings when I get introduced to them is I will start with saying, like, we have common goals, right? That's what working culture is. What are those goals? And I will break it into 4. And I will say, Andrea, where will the world be if we do our job correctly, right? And we market this product, or we do this meeting, or we do the change management. What benefit will there be to the world, to this company, to this product, or this initiative, or whatever we're working on, and to you personally, right? Now, Andrew and I worked in an environment where we were launching products that were medical products. And so you could say, if we do it right, the world will be healthier. This company will do very well. This product will become the leading product in this category. And I personally will get something on my resume that says I worked for Lipitor. And that was great. And everybody go, oh, you worked for Lipitor, right? So when you can break it down, so I'm just curious, like when you have people doing these meetings, what are some of the common objectives, or what are some of the common problems that people have in reaching those objectives? Is they don't even recognize that they have a common goal. And I'm amazed at how often I run these meetings and I go, what does it mean if you guys do a good job? And everybody's shy about it. And I'll go like, what does it mean to you? And they don't want to put it out there. I'm like, everybody's here because we get paid. As well, not tonight, but as much as we like each other at work, someone's paying us to execute a job, and that job should have a common goal. And the purpose of that is to really give them a sense of, we are trying to work together, not because it's nice, but because it's how you get things done.
Mhm.
and your inability to work together is shooting holes in your own canoe. Somebody is going to end up paying the piper on that one. So Priya, I'm very curious because actually change management is very, very close to this. Do you
Yeah.
ever find that people just don't realize that they're actually being self-defeating when they sort of resist certain things?
Oh my goodness, Brad, you just nailed it. And it's my job as a change manager to educate them what's in it for them on an individual level, and then how it benefits the company and ultimately the shareholders as well. So culture is very much a shared endeavor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that to me is the key thing that people often miss, especially I first started doing these on client relationships. So agency client relationships can get very agonistic.
Mm.
Client can become very hostile. They can say you're not doing your job right. And at some point, I'm always marveling that people don't just walk in and go, if you succeed in getting us fired, it's going to take you 6 months to get a new agency and 6 months to get them up to speed. And all you're going to have succeeded in doing is starting another dysfunctional relationship. Let's fix this one. It's cheaper and faster. But there seems to be this sort of default to blame and shame. And there's a lot of, so let's get to the first thing of trust. Part of trust is feeling that people aren't trying to, have at least your best interests neutrally in mind. When you walk into a situation where people are actively trying to pull each other down or think they're trying to get something over on each other, I think a lot of clients these days get taught like treat the agency like someone who's trying to get away with something. You're not going to have a very trusting relationship, and you're not going to be able to build much in the way of working culture. Is that a doorbell?
Yeah, Wilhelm just joined us.
Wilhelm. Okay. So culture can be bagels. It can be a foosball table. It can be we all go out for drinks on Tuesday night. But all of those things really have nothing to do with the core mission of why you're together. And I think one of the reasons people do these things is they view the symptom as the cause. They see that very high performing teams tend to like each other's company. And so they say, well, if we make them like each other's company, they'll become a high performing team. That rarely works unless you actually talk about what the problems are. So any last thoughts on culture? Any we don't need to sort of sit here too long. I have an anthropologist and a couple other people on who know exactly what I'm talking about. So no use sort of like riding this into the ground, but there are a lot of ways of defining culture from a work team standpoint. Does this sort of clarify things a little bit? It's a group of people working together to achieve common ends. From a facilitation standpoint, that is a touchstone you can go back to over and over and over again. You don't even have to like each other. I have some good stories about that. You can actually dislike each other actively and work together quite well, right? Lots of people do it. Lots and lots of musicians keep bands together. Lots and lots of, professional sports teams are full of people who literally loathe each other. If you can put it aside to work together, you will be much more successful than if you go, first, I have to like you. You don't. It's nice, but you don't. Okay. So what gets in the way, right? If working culture is a group of people trying to achieve common goals, what are the things that get in the way? Now, Priya should be able to do this in her sleep, but I think we all kind of know what a bad team is like.
Well, ego.
Ego. Say more.
Um, People don't like being told they're wrong. People don't like being challenged. People don't like feeling like they can't do something or being proven wrong. So those are all the ways that I see ego getting in the way. And it goes back to how I approach every one of my coaching clients, whether they're resisting change or they're encountering others resisting change. It has to do with validation. So the number one step to moving the needle toward change or just moving an initiative down the road is validation, because ego will show up, whether it's in a big way or a small way. The resistances will show up, and for the reasons I already listed, they don't like being told they're wrong. They don't, they're offended. And
Yeah.
validating people, and that doesn't have anything to do with telling them they're right, but making sure they feel heard and that they yeah, that's the simplest way to put it. So
I
that's
hear you, Don. No,
yeah.
I'm kidding. I'm just joking. Um, no, that makes a lot of sense. And actually, that's not ever a perspective I've ever taken before. It makes perfect sense for the individual. Like, why are they behaving the way they are in a certain situation? So ego gets in the way. What are some, I tend to think very functionally, right? I'm a functionalist. So what are some of the things specifically where ego manifests, or where just, what's the pebble in your shoe? It's not a pebble, it's a huge rock in the mountain, right? But what's a pebble in your shoe for teams?
I think avoidance might be a thing.
Avoidance?
Yeah, so it's like I don't like this person, but the juice is not worth the squeeze of me resolving something. Like I don't interface with them that much. The relationship is not that important. They are their own person. They're an adult. They probably heard feedback before. It's not my job to give them feedback. It's not my job to patch things up. I'm just going to avoid them.
Okay. Laurence, what are some ways that teams get in their own way?
Well, I might say immaturity.
Okay. Andrea, what were you going to say?
Well, I think with all of this, I can't help but to think about, I sometimes have led teams, and Brad, since we've worked together, I've sometimes led teams of 50 plus people. And so trying to herd that many cats, I think the biggest thing I've seen with teams is not having a defined what is going to happen and how to get there. And therefore, trying to the how to get there, I usually am very careful to assign everyone's role, because as much as there are those egos, which I'll sometimes call those rock stars that always get a lot of attention, there's those solid rocks of people that like just get the shit done and don't look for the attention. But I got to slow down the egotistical ones with their needed recognition of the people that get the shit done. So that usually takes me early to finding out what to anticipate each other. So it's a full team rather than just those rock stars that step all over us. So
that's really good point. And by the way, roles, right? So that's just underline that one. If we were actually doing visual facility, like clear roles and responsibilities, that's like, yeah. Laurence, go
and then they
ahead.
see the dependency of each other, hopefully. Or and then once they line to that, they go, oh, and they nod their heads. And then so a month from now, when someone's being a jerk again, it's like, hey, remember? So it's that early sort of foundational stuff.
Yeah. Laurence and then Priya.
Yeah, I would just wanted to elaborate. Andrea said something really, really powerful there. And I only use one word, immaturity, because I see that as a symptom of, of things getting in the way. And an example of that is what you said, Brad, which is I'm just going to look outwards and point fingers and blame.
Right.
Because that's easy. I don't have to grow here. I just do this and that, and I'm happy. And that mindset of not wanting to just step from that and say, let's make this more constructive and look outward, look forward and say, hey, park the ego in the closet or wherever you need to leave it and go there, and have that constructive. I mean, I was banging my head against the walls, for months with a team. It's like, could we just like take a step forward? Like, even if it's just an inch, let's just not get in this.
That's so frustrating, right? When people are just so dysfunctional, and the one thing you never get back is time, and you lose your launch window or whatever, right? And you're like, well,
Yeah,
we've
it's
just
just
frittered that away.
that perpetual, and I'll stop talking, but it's just a perpetual conversation, right? You keep coming back to the same thing over and over, and
Yeah.
And that's and that adds to that frustration. Anyway, so I'll stop here.
It's okay. It was really, really good. Thank you. Priya.
I really enjoyed hearing Andrea's perspective on it. Very powerful, very true, very rooted in the real world. I think culture, good culture, is inclusive, you know. So not only the people that are in the different teams should feel like they're part of the team. So it's not just the loud mouths or the loud ones, who get all the attention and all that, but the quiet, shy ones should also feel like their perspective is being listened to. And then on the other side of the fence are the leaders, the steering committees, at work, who are trying to tell employees why this is important and why they should care, you know. So there also I've noticed that it's never just your CEO or your chief people person or, whoever is leading um, the culture change initiative, but there also is a coalition of change agents. So it's very inclusive there as well.
Yeah. And listen, sometimes it can be very frustrating. I'm gonna get to how I sort of approach looking at teams and breaking them down. This has been fascinating for me because this has been much more about the psychology of team dynamics than the way I'm going to. I'm very much a functionalist, but one of the things that Priya just said, which is very interesting, is there are different ways the teams organize themselves. And I use this example quite often. I worked, well, it doesn't matter actually. I can tell you it was Novo Nordisk. That is a Scandinavian company headquartered in Scandinavia, but with most of its money coming out of the United States. So you've got two teams, the headquarters in Europe and the team in the US, both thinking they're the proverbial 800-pound gorilla. Fine, no problem. Unclear role, unclear responsibility. It's not clear whose final decision it is. Here's where culture can get in the way in terms of like process culture. Scandinavia is radically democratic and everybody votes on everything. In the United States, it's very much about like make the money, captain of industry, that sort of thing. And what was incredibly frustrating leading up to a very important launch for both sets of clients was every time a new member came onto the leadership team, which is very common ramping up the launch for a product, they felt in Scandinavia that they had to go back to square one and allow this person to participate in the democratic decision-making process. Andrew's covering her face. She's been through this, right? Whereas the Americans are like, we're literally launching in 6 months. Those decisions were made and we are making decisions based on those decisions. And we cannot go back every time you hire somebody to undo those decisions and start all over again. Those are both very reasonable ways of running companies, but they come into conflict. And this is when you have to come in and be very functional and go, there's no right or wrong way around decision making. What we can't do is have one team making decisions based on decisions we made and the other team going, those are contingent decisions when we have a new team member. Because now nobody knows what to do and what we're going to do. And exactly what happened was they started arguing over decisions that had already been made and should they be unmade. And meanwhile, one of my favorite expressions, they were fighting over the radio while the car was driving off the cliff, right? So one of the things that is very, very common for teams that will get in the way is they will mistake communication for progress. We can talk about what kind of bagels we want on Monday. It's not going to help get a product launched. Now, that's probably a little different from Dawn and Priya and Laurence, what you're talking about in terms of like being seen and maturity and culture. Those things are totally important. I just want to point out that sometimes it's much easier to start with the functional and say, okay, here's what gets in the way. Misaligned goals, right? Now, we might all want to be launching a product on time, but how we do that, your goal is to be as democratic as possible. My goal is to be as efficient as possible. Those two things are great, but they just don't work together. So we are going to have to figure out, one of our goals is whose team structure wins. I don't think I've ever had that discussion in a co-promote, but if you've ever had to work with two companies as a vendor and they'll be back channeling to you, I don't really like, that's unclear roles and responsibilities. That sort of shadow communication, that sort of stuff is toxic, right? And when somebody goes, I literally don't know what my job is, the fact that that person's making, this is somebody, I'm thinking of specifically somebody from a team I was working with internally at my last company. And I was like, I knew her salary. I'm like, we are paying you a vast salary for you not to know what to do. But somebody put her in charge of this new nebulous sort of thing. And she was like, I feel like the Vatican. I have all authority and I have all moral authority and no actual power to do anything. And she, of course, quit within weeks. And so, what's your role? What's your responsibility? Is accountability lined up with responsibility? In other words, am I going to punish you for something that's out of your control? That is a classic definition of stress. So if I'm gonna, I don't know, I don't want to be like terrible, right? But if I'm going to scream at you every time it rains, you're going to be a nervous wreck because you do not control the weather. So you have no idea what's coming, right? And so that's how people often feel these days. Like, I've been given this role and I'm not, there's no metrics, right? Poor communication, poor information flow, lack of accountability, right? Somebody does something and nothing happens. Every one of these destroys trust. Okay. So my question now to all of you, and I just want you to think about it, and Brian's had a day to think about it. Here's something that I'll ask them and go, this actually can touch on every one of these things. What does it mean when you're emails deep into a slightly contentious conversation and the person you're emailing with, starts CCing new people into the discussion?
Yeah.
What does it mean?
Chaos.
Oh my God. Oh my God. I've made that mistake.
What does it mean, Priya? I didn't even imply that it was a mistake. It could be a great thing, but it's not a great thing.
Well, I meant well. I will give you a real life example. I got 3 job offers in 2 months.
Yeah.
So the third was the best one, great money, great title, everything. And it helped me, it allowed me to help the underserved, and all that. So my heart was in the right place. I'm a naturally compassionate person, and all that. And when I started working there, I noticed that the marketing director was sending me copy to approve that half the content was missing. And it was remarkable. I had never seen this kind of nonsense work before, right? I've worked for really big brands. I worked for Bank of America, AstraZeneca, all that, right? So I sent the draft back. I said, I'm sorry, I think this one's missing all that. After like the 4th or 5th draft, 5th time, he sent me back the incomplete draft. It was a newsletter, right? And so various sections in it, and the draft was just floating. It wasn't complete. So I CC'd, our joint boss, and I said, hey, not CC, I BCC'd, not even that. I actually forwarded him. I didn't BCC, I didn't know. But I forwarded to, I said, by the way, just so you know, I'm new here. I don't really know everybody, but this is the 5th iteration of this,
Yeah.
And that did not go well because then that boss said, oh, okay, let me talk to him. I don't
Yeah.
know what the 2 of them did. And then this boss comes to me and he goes, oh, Priya, we'll just make it something really simple. He goes, look at my bio. He was an adjunct professor on the side for one of the New Jersey universities. He goes, just make it like this. So I looked at it was his bio on that website that he sent me. He goes, just make it like this, simple. I said, okay. I took a look at the bio and even that had mistakes in it,
Right.
which I pointed
So he
out.
clearly didn't know the difference.
Which,
But what was the net effect of you going to someone else with this message?
yeah, I'm never doing that again, by the way. And coupled with a couple other things, I was told I was not a good fit at that role.
Yeah, I mean, okay. So there's one for sure, right? And I'll dive into that one in a second. But like, Andrea, what does it mean if you and I are going back and forth over a deliverable and all of a sudden you CC like your creative director?
Well, I just have this problem with, I hate mediums that people might not be masters in both giving or taking. So my problem with all this is the 5 emails in by a meeting or by email 2 or 3, just get together in a room.
There you go. Right. That's number one. That's number one.
So it's a bigger thing. So if I'm going to include other people, I usually am going to let people know. And usually it's going to be a matter too that like I'm going to give credit. I'm going to say where I have absences of ability or creativity or something like that before I'm going to add someone in. So I'm going to probably give a cop out of I'm not qualified. That's why I'm inviting other people. If it's a matter of disciplinary, yeah, that's also going to get out of email before I start to do that sort of shit. And that goes on the client side too. I mean, but then again, I am a lot more like in people's face and hopefully a good way than a lot of other people. But that's how I operate. I mean, you even use the example of a co-promote. I like co-promotes because then it's hopefully more of a people problem that I've got to ground them and like erase that kind of shit. So I don't know.
Yeah, I never told you this, but I know I've never told you this, but one time one of our clients held an entire advisory board without their co-promote partner knowing.
Oh my God. I hate to say it, fire the account person in that situation.
No, they came to us and they were like, we need to do it. We don't want them to know. Anyway, it doesn't matter. This is just sort of inside baseball stuff, but it was so not building trust, right? I'll take one more on the CC thing. Like, what does it mean? What does it mean in context when you're in a slightly contentious discussion via email and all of a sudden new people start showing up?
It does not mean anything positive. It's a net negative, and it, you have to take that offline and kind of building on what Andrea said. You have to be very clear what you want those people to do. You have to take all the assumption out of it for everybody on that chain to understand what the roles are of people, especially the people added, because otherwise it's going to go off the rails and people are going to start contributing or not contributing and violating expectations that people may or may not have. So, or may have. So it's just bad in every way possible.
So I'm going to take a step back, right? Because Brian just said, I'm never using it again. It's super useful, right? Provided everybody agrees they know what it's for. So what people typically do is they start assembling an army and it feels like they're about to go to war. Like, oh, you picked on my kid brother. Let me go get mom. Let me go get dad. Let me go get the neighborhood kids. And by the time you're done, you've got 80 people on this email thread about something that A, as you guys pointed out, probably could have been resolved earlier, but B, why did you do it? All right. So Laurence, go ahead. And then I'm going to tell you guys what I tell people about CC. Go ahead.
Yeah, I worked with this one woman who insisted on having the client copied on any and all messages, meaning that we, as the vendor, could not have prior back and forth. Whether
like
it
a
was
terrible idea.
It was
oh my
the
God.
worst idea ever. But this was her conditions for having any kinds of communications, and I'm like, wow, this is really creating a bad situation for the vendor and for the client. It's like there are things that need to be vetted before they go to the client. Always, like, why are you insisting on putting these guardrails that are not really guardrails whatsoever?
No, they're not. In fact, they're designed to make sure that you never ever say it, what's on your mind ever.
So it to me was very counterproductive, and it was
So these communication things are very, very important. And what I will say, let's pretend for a moment that the six of us are a team and that I'm in charge of this team. All right. Just for the moment. I mean, I don't know what we'd be doing. Right. But here's what I would say is I don't know about communication practices in your previous teams, but for me, CC is very useful, but here's a couple things it doesn't do. Right. You have not briefed me in. So if you CC me on something that's 7 screens long, I'm not going to read it, right? CC means you want me to be generally aware. You cannot come back to me a week later and go, well, you should know because I CC'd you. That is not briefing me in. If you want me to do something, put me in the 2 line, send me an email, call me out in the body of it, right? And I just sort of set expectations and I go, number 2, if you CC me on something that seems the least bit contentious, the first thing I'm going to ask you is, to Andrea's point, if it's between Andrea and Dawn, I'm going to go, Andrea, did you talk to Dawn yet? I'm going to reject it. I'm going to turn it back. I am not going to take this invitation to wade into something because I have other things to do. And the third thing I'll say is you better be very careful about what you pull me into, because part of your job is to resolve these things, right? Your job is not to come to me so I can resolve it, because that's not actually what they pay me to do. And it's not the pay part. We have roles, and this comes back to the roles, right? I'm not saying that's right. I'm not saying it works. What I'm saying is I don't let people guess, right? I tell my teams what CC means and the acceptable use for CC. And then there's no mystery. So, Brian, in that context, you can absolutely use CC. If you want me to be generally aware of something the team is doing, and we've all agreed that that's what CC means. And we've also all agreed, to Dawn's point, that I'm not going to let you use it to round up your army and see, get two people on either side. The most common thing you would see in agency life, for example, is that the production studio and the account team would argue over what the deadline had been agreed to. And that's great, but I don't need to get involved in that. And also, I don't know how I can help. And I'm certainly not here to resolve it unless you invite me in to be your mediator, in which case, can't account and production work this out, right? Now, I'm sure in your own version of things, right? This is very agency specific, what I just described, but it could be anything, right? I'm sure Brian could think of 10 of them off the top of his head, where it's like disagreements happen, right? They happen. You got to learn how to figure them out. So what I will tell people is, okay, we've defined what our working goals are, right? So for this team of 6, for the next 40 minutes and for the previous 50, the goal has been that we all learn a little something about culture and trust and everything. And hopefully it's working great, but there's no point in you guys shooting holes in the canoe, right? Like, we all want to learn something. I want to learn something. I already learned a bunch of stuff from you guys tonight. If you frame it that way, that this isn't like a fight, this isn't a series of agonistic processes waiting to unfold, but rather it's a series of collaborative processes that we just need to optimize and be mindful of our own role within. And if you're confused, and this is where trust comes in as well, if you're confused, trust that the other person didn't do it on purpose and just go ask them. Now, I'm as guilty as the next person, right? I had somebody cancel a meeting on me Friday at 3:30. And they were like, we'll set something up first thing next week. And then they set something up for 4 o'clock the following Friday. And I immediately said to them, look, these are the only times we have, but I'm getting the sense like I'm getting the last slot so I can be kicked down the road again. Like, just ask, right? But that's where trust comes in. Can you ask if you feel like your head's going to get taken off?
Well,
So there's a
you're less inclined to ask, but it's a calculation of, okay, what's the, risk reward? If I don't ask, what are the potential outcomes? If I do ask, yeah, short term it may suck, but long term it's going to be better. There'll be a net gain.
Yeah, and this is where Andrea, as a team leader of 50 people and stuff, this is really where the art of knowing who you're talking to comes in. And you can either be better or worse at that and those sorts of things. But one of the things I will tell people is the hallmark of any functional culture is that they take differences of opinion and turn them into better ideas, not fights to the death. If you cannot have a difference of opinion in a functional, mature way, you have a shitty marriage, you have a shitty friendship, you have a shitty work culture, you have a shitty team, right? You have to be able to disagree. Otherwise, everybody is just being polite and nobody's actually doing their job. So that's the other thing I will get called in for very often is like, well, they think this and we think that. And I'm like, yeah, my job is not to elect or shock somebody into thinking what you think. My job is to help you guys resolve your differences of opinion. You have to find a way. And if that way is Brian's, Brian's in charge and he's going to listen for 5 minutes to everybody and make a decision, and then we all just go with it, fine, that works. If we have radical democracy and we're all going to vote, fine, that can work. It's slower, but it's more collaborative. There's no one right way. But what happens is when you have somebody who goes, my job seems to be more to fight with the rest of the team, that's when lack of accountability comes in. Pretty much any team you walk in, and Priya, again, as the change management person, if you asked everybody to identify who's the least likely person to get on board with this, they would know.
Yeah, we do. We form a grid that has our opponents and our skeptics and the promoters and the sponsors. And then we designate, swim lanes for each.
Do you ever
Um,
have just bad actors?
yeah, because resistance is many times passive. It
Yeah.
doesn't actively raise its head. So change management, is the art of empowering people, right? So you have to have I guess, a very nuanced understanding of human nature.
Yeah.
And what I try to do is, and I may be wrong about this, but the way I personally um, try to win over resistors is, and formulate a better work culture is two things, two-pronged strategy. First is I try to align everybody around a shared goal by giving a persuasive data-driven argument, right? So for example, if it's a utility company and you're telling them, hey, our infrastructure is aging and we are, implementing an SAP S/4HANA digital transformation, and everybody's gonna be like, why do we need it now? We've whatever, you know. So I try to tell them that by standardizing our processes, we can achieve XYZ things in finance and supply chain, whatever the case is for change. Give it like a, data-driven um, narrative. And then I always try to humanize my message, you know. So that I have found, because one or the other, if it's only a humanized messaging minus the data-driven narrative, I think that lacks teeth. And if it's only data-driven and it doesn't have that human component, then it's very dry, and then people are like, oh, one more thing, one more chore. And I
100%.
remember a long time ago, early in my career, when I was working for India's second largest newspaper, I used to write articles on alcohol and drug abuse. And it was very much exactly what you're saying. The culture was very much against talking about these taboos. Like here in America, you say, fine, I was at a meeting. I was
Yeah.
AA, whatever. People like, okay, cool for you, good for you, man, all that.
Yeah.
But in India, it was like, oh, XYZ is an
Yeah.
alcoholic. So
Right.
that's where I stumbled upon this strategy, because I didn't know that change management formally existed back then, right? But I
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
just saw
Yeah.
it like happening in the world around me. Like my friends' parents were alcoholics and all that. So I just started, talking to these alcoholics who were doctors and who were truck drivers, because, it's very important to democratize the flow of information. You got to talk to different demographics. So you talk to men, women, teenagers, blue collar, white collar, all different demographics, and ask about your, change strategy. And then that's it. I talked about the data of alcoholism, what it does to your body, and then sugar coated it, in a humanized perspective. And it helped open treatment centers all
I
over.
mean, you've touched on two different aspects of culture that are fundamentally resistant to change. One is taboos, and the other is institutions themselves. So institutions codify practices. So they survive based on continuity. And one of the things you have to tell a team that is about to, well, I mean, you could always just musk it, right, and just destroy things. But if you're actually trying to thoughtfully change a company, you have to tell them the company itself is designed not to change. The company itself has practices that have been optimized and evolved over years and years and years and years. And every change implies a change to other things. And so, as a team, us, the six of us who are now going to change whatever it is, right? We have to recognize that part of the problem is how we've been socialized into this company. A lot of times, change management is people who've been at the company a long time versus people who haven't been at the company a long time. And you have to really walk the fine line. But to your point, you find a shared goal. This company is failing. This company is failing to thrive. This company is failing to grow. I mean, again, I think in terms of ads, right? One of the most compelling ad cases for change management was the Army. Like it or not, the Army needed to change how it recruited because they weren't filling all the slots for all the soldiers. And you can argue in a bunch of different ways. It's actually mostly driven by demographics, but you cannot change the Army if all they want to do is keep tradition. And you go, right, but you don't have enough people in your tanks. So something's got to give, right? And that then becomes how you go, okay, now we're a team. Now we've got a shared goal. It's get kids in tanks, jumping out of airplanes, whatever it is, right? And then how do we do that? But if you're still arguing over whether or not we need kids in tanks, you've got nothing, right? So it's shared objective, shared mission, shared goal. And then how do we openly communicate with each other? And the reason I say we don't have to like each other, I use examples from sports sometimes, but it actually is true. Andrea and I weren't friends before we started working together. We liked working together and we became friends. Working together successfully gives you trust, shows you what someone is capable of. Football teams in America, high school football is one of the most toxic environments there is. Okay. I love football, but I'm telling you, watching one of my sons go through football, if you didn't have the right last name, if you weren't a coach's kid, if anything, if it didn't go to the right church, like there were so many ways of not getting on the field. And I remember him saying to me, he was a very, very aware kid, and he was 17. And I was like, do you want anybody at your graduation from the team? He's like, I can't stand them. I was like, you're literally spending 20 hours a week with these guys. He goes, when they put on the uniform, we play for each other. Like we can't win without playing for each other, but I don't like them, they don't like me. And it was an interesting sort of perspective. And he was a little more popular than that. I may be zhuzhing it up a little bit for effect, but the point is, I know there were several kids on the team he actually loathed, like thought they were bad people, thought they were bullies, thought there were a lot of things. And he was like, you put it aside when you get on the field because we have a shared objective. There's no point in my not blocking for a guy just because I don't like him, because we are going to lose. And that's a very good metaphor. A lot of times people lose the forest for the trees into personal vendettas. And that really does come from leadership, right? The last thing I'll say is strict parents make skilled liars. Have you ever heard that expression?
Oh, yeah. I've seen it too.
Yeah, we've all seen it, right? But if you're the kind of boss who goes like, bring me good news, or I'm just gonna, paint the walls with your blood, guess what? You're not going to get anything but good news, right? So the communication, the accountability, unclear roles and responsibilities, the goals, that is leadership's job to define those things and to enforce them. And the last thing I'll say, I guess, about this one, and it really comes down to trust. So, hold on. So how do we build a positive culture? What is question, right? It's just like, what is trust? What is a positive culture, right? And it is not a bunch of smiling people. I'm just gonna, right? This is bullshit. That photo, I wanted to see like positive work culture's first photo came up like bullshit, right? This is not, right, us putting all our hands in and smiling at each other. That's not work culture. That's just, I don't know. I don't even know what that's supposed to be. I've certainly never done it, and I'm very fond of many of my coworkers. So how do you build positive culture if it's not like smiling at each other like you've all had a lobotomy and putting your hands in the middle? Then what is a positive work culture?
A positive work culture, in my very humble opinion, is a place where you can have the psychological safety to disagree and yet continue to work together in search of a solution that will propel the agenda forward for everyone.
Laurence is clapping. Yeah, that's pretty good. That's pretty good definition. That was pretty slick right off the top of your head there. That was pretty good. Anyone want to add to it?
We had there was a phrase that was introduced at one of my last companies, which there's a couple of different wrong things about that company, but I liked this, which goes to your metaphor about teams. It's playing for the name on the front of your shirt, not the name on the back.
Yeah.
The idea that the logo or company, like, but the thing I always liked bridging from that is it doesn't mean that there is not a name on the back of your shirt, but hopefully that's the rest of your life. Like
Well,
you
listen,
put yourself,
it doesn't have
anything.
to be an either or, right? If you do it right on a football team, you all get to win a Super Bowl together, right? And that is the personal goal of every football player who plays in America, is to win the big ring, right? And that's why I'll often say, like, and again, this is you can use it differently, right? But if you're in a marketing services job, which is really where Andrea and I spend most of our time, then the goal will be whatever product you're advertising launches correctly. And if it's I don't know, if it's a over-the-counter birth control, then the world will be a better place because there will be access to birth control. The company will be better off because it will be making a commercially viable product. This product, this brand will be better off because our job will have been to sort of put it forward and make it accessible and all that stuff. And you personally will benefit because you will have been on a functional team. Nothing about the way teams work means that you lose when the team wins if it's a good team. Now, that's again where you have to be a little careful. Sometimes bosses steal credit and stuff like that, but that's a thing to be worked out. But if you're in a position where team success means you fail, that is by definition a totally dysfunctional culture. There is no
That
culture
happened.
in which everybody shouldn't be able to succeed at work.
I can give an example of, well, everything you said is 120,000% correct. I was recently working at a company where they made educational products like, testing,
Yeah,
um,
sure.
tests and
ETS?
stuff. Oh my God, do you know somebody there?
No, it's just they're the only people who make educational testing materials and actually properly test them.
Oh, okay. Well, it's all going to AI now. They fired people who make sure that the tests are done more securely. So the quality control is, but anyway, this happened to me. So ETS, the Wall Street Journal published a story on ETS's research saying that adult Americans the most poorly educated workers are struggling to read at a fifth grade level, and math also, that they can't read thermometers, they can't understand information on websites, etc. So they published our research. Okay. So I'm also a former journalist. I used to work for NPR and all that. So I do a blend of internal communications and external communications, right? So I spoke to my new manager and I said, listen, here's a great opportunity. Why don't I talk to 5 or 6 people who were in the study? And it was a vast study. I think 160,000 people around the world, right? So I said, it's a substantial study. Why don't I do a photo essay of like 5 to 6 workers, who are poorly educated and who are struggling, with exactly this, right? And how our products are helping them, because that would humanize the narrative. Duh. So I said, for example, if somebody has a bad job, they're struggling, they're standing out in the snow waiting to catch their second bus to get to work because they can't afford a car, or they're struggling with medical bills, they can help their children with homeworks. We could do a photo essay highlighting their struggles. And my manager said exactly this. Yeah, it's a good idea, but we'll do it sometime in 2025. I said, but this is very important to do it now because the Wall Street Journal just published our story.
Yep.
It's called a news hook. So you strike when the iron is hot. And she's like, yeah, we'll just do it, because she's not a journalist, right? She doesn't understand that. And then I spoke to this other person there. She's like, it's a great idea. You should talk to the general manager of, he did something, maybe he has some insight. So I spoke to the general manager, and even he said, it's a great idea. Tell me, how can I help you? Everybody loved that idea except my manager, right? And so when I went back to my manager, I said, look, I did some more research and I found out these things, and everybody's supportive. Do you think we can talk about it? She's like, this is insubordination, Priya. How could you go behind my back and talk to these people? And my jaw was on the floor. I said, I'm trying to give you data. It's not that I called the Wall Street Journal directly and said,
It's so funny. I had a boss accuse me of insubordination recently, and it was when I said, like, this 10-year relationship is over. I mean, I still reported to him, but I was like, this gets to this is actually a really good pivot point, right? Trust. Trust is, I have a very good friend. I met him through Boy Scouts, believe it or not. I was not a Boy Scout as a child. I was a Boy Scout leader. I had two sons and a daughter, and I went camping a lot. And one of the reasons I stayed in it was because some of the adult leaders, the men I met, were just so impressive. So just so you know, those of you who live in Manhattan, the fire chief for all of Northern Manhattan was one of the Boy Scout leaders in my troop. Very humble guy, very nice guy, but like top of the pyramid in the FDNY. This other guy had been a captain in the Army Rangers. And so he was the one who taught us how to like make snow caves and stuff like that. Like he was a tough guy, right? But he actually runs field forces now for big pharmaceutical companies. And one of the things that I noticed is the Army's very good at identifying leaders. And he was groomed as a leader. He was sent to college by the Army. He was sent along in a lot of places. One of the best leaders I ever met. He has a lot of stories about how leadership works. And he was great with the boys, teaching them. And one of the things he used to say is good followers make good leaders. You got to learn how to take an order to give an order. If you think being in charge is just telling people what to do, you're absolutely wrong, right? You got to learn how to take an order before you can give an order, that sort of stuff. And he always, oh, sorry. He would always show a fishbowl if we were talking to the boys. And he goes, if you were going to fill up a fishbowl drop by drop, how long would it take you? And, boys don't know, 1,000 years, like they're stupid. And then they'll come up with something stupid, right? And it's all funny, right? But the point is, it takes a long time to fill up a fishbowl dropper by dropper. How long does it take to empty a fishbowl with a baseball? About 2 seconds, right? So when Priya's boss says that's insubordinate, that can drain every drop of trust that was put in there. And that's something people have to be very, very, very careful about when you start talking about building teams is, are you so far gone that you don't even trust each other anymore? At which point you have to put in some kind of radical, like, we need to make sure that we're talking to each other and rebuilding that, because nothing can be accomplished if I just assume whatever Andrea's doing, it's not in my best interest. Okay. You can see it all across the globe in terms of politics right now. There are certain, what they call frozen conflicts. A very famous frozen conflict when I was growing up, which seems to have sort of calmed down considerably, was Northern Ireland. There was no give. There was no trust. There was nothing. And I went to Belfast during the Troubles, and it was crazy how segregated it was. And you could not imagine these people ever working together, right? When you are that far apart from trusting each other, the first thing you have to do is rebuild trust. And it is not necessarily putting your hands in and cheering or singing songs. It's the stuff we talked about. Can you actually consistently resolve conflicts? Do you know who's in charge? And do they actually have authority? Because one of the things that'll happen is, and this is why I hate co-promotes, Andrea, is you'll make a decision, and then the next thing you know, you'll get an email from a different client going, we don't have to pay any attention to that. And all of a sudden you've got a shadow government, a deep state. And you're like, yes. And Andrea, what do you do immediately upon receipt of that email?
The truth is, it so gets under my skin, Brad, that like that shit does not last with me. If I'm gonna be on that business, I'm
Right.
resolving that. Like,
you got to jump on it like a monkey on a cupcake. You cannot let that.
If you don't want to work on a co-promote before, again, I will be the lead for that.
Yeah. Now the last one is, does anybody know what seagulling is?
Yes.
Of course you do, because you work at an ad agency. Seagulling, Brian, you'll like this one. This will translate into a good visual. Do you know what it is?
Swooping in and shitting on people, right?
It's swooping into a room, screeching, shitting all over everything, and grabbing a snack and leaving. Right?
Yeah. Also, pooping is another way of using it.
Poop and swoop. Yeah, it is incredibly common in ad agencies, especially during pitches, that you have to review it with senior management, who then don't have enough respect to show up when they said they would. And with an hour before you have to go, they swoop in and go, this makes no sense. The best boss I ever had for that, who actually was not a person I particularly liked on a personal level, but he really understood it. And he said, my job when I come in to review the creative at this point is to help you turn the apple so the bruise doesn't show. He understood the limits of what he could do within the time he was given. And his job was not to come in and somehow push us to magical new heights. That's disrespectful of the process, of the work, of the time. And that is, again, just taking a hammer to the goldfish bowl, right? And people I've liked as people have been the worst seagullers. People I have disliked as people and would not have wanted to drive to Massachusetts with, let alone cross country, I thought were excellent in handling this stuff. So again, like helps, but you can trust somebody to do their job, even if you don't think they're your cup of tea, right? And that's the really important thing is people sometimes, go ahead, Dawn.
Well, I would like you to finish your thought because I want to make a little bit of a left turn, but I want you to finish your thought.
I think respect is something, everything, the point is the tone, and I think Priya said this earlier, or Laurence might have, the tone is set at the top. The accountability is set at the top. The floor is set at the top. Remember I said at the beginning, it's not what you aspire to, it's what you put up with that defines culture. So again, I'll go back to the football team real quick and then I'll get to you, Don, right? But for example, you can say this was a different one. This was a baseball team. The coach obviously played his son in every position and all this stuff. They were like 10 years old. And he made this big song and dance about how everybody needs to cheer and everybody needs to be there on time and every blah, 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 blah. The fact of the matter is, if you could play baseball, you could show up 2 minutes before the game. And it was so obvious that there was two sets of rules that it just really turned off the kids who showed up on time and then didn't play because they weren't as good. So it was a lie, right? And he lost most of the team that way. And that's the kind of thing where we say it's the floor, not the ceiling. If you put up with your best player showing up 2 minutes before the game, you will have a team full of people who show up 2 minutes before the game. And Bill Belichick, love him, hate him, whatever, he was famous for holding everybody accountable. If you were late to a meeting, you were not going to play. Doesn't matter if you were Tom Brady. That's why Tom Brady was never late. He would leave 4 hours early because you would not be allowed to practice that day. You'd have to go home. Look, phenomenal consistency. You got flexibility, whatever. But the point is there's flexibility and then there's just hypocrisy. And that one, I think for a lot of people, return to office feels like hypocrisy. It feels like, so you're not coming in, but I have to come in, right? Those sorts of things. It's very difficult to get people on board for that. So how do you create trust? Be granular, be consistent. It's the details. Yes, I would love it if Andrea and I get along every time we see each other, but maybe Andrea's in a bad mood or maybe I had a bad commute. It's okay. As long as I'm consistent and don't vary my work habits and we both are mutually accountable to each other, we'll work through that part. So Dawn, go ahead. You were going to say something. You want to take a left turn?
No, it's okay. It's on the slide, and the left turn is, how would you recommend somebody navigate a culture where the top person, who obviously is setting the tone for the culture, is the opposite of that slide? She is
A
not
narcissistic sociopath?
No, but she's very loosey-goosey, very disorganized, and changes her mind about on any particular topic about 3 times a day. So it's very basically impossible for anybody to be productive, be efficient, and follow her. And if you're not willing to just constantly and be happy about that wackadoodle environment, then you're the bad guy.
This is such an excellent question. All right. First of all, excellent question. Second of all, everybody take 30 seconds and think of your answer because I think every single person on this call has an answer for how they would approach this. And we're going to do a rapid, okay? And we're going to hear everybody's answer starting with Brian,
Oh,
unless
boy.
Brian doesn't. Well, if you don't want to participate, that's fine. You
No,
are.
no, happy to participate.
Go.
All right, going. So, I mean,
Strict on time.
All right, very quickly then. I like to think that the things that I do best are bringing order to chaos. So I actually like a little bit of randomness in my life. If everybody was Disney World, then there'd be no job for me, And so I kind of like working with people who others might label dysfunctional or chaotic or, capricious. It's like, okay, cool. You've got big ideas. You're all over the place. Let's channel that stuff into something real.
Okay, good. Go with the flow. I'm going to call that go with the flow. Is that acceptable to
Yeah,
you?
sure.
Okay. Dawn, I'm not doing you next because you asked a question. Sorry. Laurence,
Could you repeat the question? I'm sorry. I think I
what do
missed
you
it.
do when the person in charge is not consistent, does not foster resolution of conflicts, does not create clear who's in charge, does not enforce, does not interact in a sort of consistent, positive way? What do you do if they're the problem?
No, ignore them to the
Okay.
best that I can, I guess. Not sure what if I've been in this situation, have I?
They're the boss, though. They're the top. They're the
Yeah.
top person.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll stick with my answer. Ignore them to the best of my.
Work around it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Brian's basically work with it. He likes it. Surf that wave, right? Laurence says work around it. Andrea, we've both worked for people like this.
The way I do it is I never allow them to be isolated. So I don't want them to be that poop and swoop situation. I don't want them to I don't want them to be off the cuff. So I try to make it formal for them to be in the room as the decision's being made and they've got to look everyone in the eye, and formal. So sometimes it's a matter of giving them physical presence in the room and they have to write that final decision down. They have to literally pen it because then I think they can internalize it a little bit better. Or there's like a feed out, like there's some sort of like report, a contact report or that kind of thing that goes out, because then that's it and their names on it and it's aligned. Because I think that I try to essentially, I guess what I'm saying is I'm trying to build accountability. And I
You're trying to
sometimes feel
put
like,
structure, if I may, you're trying to put
yeah,
structure in place that doesn't allow them to be just random. You're
yeah,
trying to manage up and you're trying to put some processes in place that they must follow.
yeah. And I also try to have like a little bit of patience with them, because what I've realized with a lot of times when they're doing that sort of shit is they're not fully present when this is happening. They're just giving an answer, but not understanding the ramifications of the time before and what's going to happen afterwards. So if I make sure it's structured for them to really be present, I feel like it goes a lot better. But some people are just jerks. But I'm
Yeah.
just,
Yeah. Absolutely. Priya, okay, take it home.
I agree with Andrea again. If the boss is just too busy talking about her kids and she's married to somebody else at the company who's like a higher up and he shields her, like that also happened.
gee, this is very specific.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it was remarkable.
And the name wrongs with no, anyway.
I did report
So that's
Yeah,
kind of
yeah, that happened.
yeah.
I
So there are social dynamics. If it is a one person shop, I worked for somebody who was a genuine sociopath. I have learned. I mean,
oh no.
well, it happens. Look, I mean, there's been numerous articles. This is a sort of left turn, and then I'll bring it back, right? But there have been numerous articles that if there's a steep pyramid at the top of a company, for example, if there's 5 people vying for the corner office, the one who's going to get it is the one who will knife the other ones in the back. They know that there's a problem at the top of corporate America, that the less empathy you display, the further you will go in the current state of companies. And look it up. It's called The Sociopath in the Corner Office. I think it's a Harvard Business Review article, but there's numerous articles that many CEOs and C-suite, they're not sociopaths, but they display certain sociopathic tendencies. It's how they got to where they are, but they're not actually like mass murderers. They just sometimes are hard to convince because they're a little bit more self-focused and ambitious. I will say that it depends on the context, right? So where Andrea and I work, there's a lot of production that goes on, or there used to be. And so if somebody's capricious, it actually throws money out the window and it throws schedules off. And so you can use that resource to say to somebody, listen, You're as inspiring as can be, but you cannot tell the production team that the thing they've been working on all weekend has to change again, like unless it's life or death. So you just kind of come to them and you put it to them. Here's your strengths, here's your weaknesses, here's where I can help you. Or you do it covertly and go, I'm just going to engineer it, nudge architecture so that you have to be accountable to this stuff. Or in Priya's case, you might have to go to somebody who's even further, like the board, and, you know, play the Game of Thrones where you win or you die. And you go, look, we got a dynamic here. I'm telling you right now, we're never going to fix this because these two are married and he's shielding her and there is no chain of command. Right. But I think that it's a case by case thing. But the one thing I would say is, like Brian says, he likes it. He likes it until a guy 5 minutes before they're due to go live with 300 people tries to change something. It really depends on how disruptive it is, and it really depends on who's impacted. So when Andrea and I think about this stuff, it's because ad agencies make their money through production, believe it or not. And we cannot mess up production. We cannot mess up timelines. Dawn, I don't actually know your business, so I can't say how you would manage it, but there's really, everybody has sort of hit the three that I'm aware of. One is you work around it, you isolate the problem. Two is you address the problem directly. And three is you address the problem indirectly, either going around or up or covertly like Andrea does. Of those three, it can all work. It just depends. It depends on the situation. Is that fair?
Yeah, no, that's
Oh, yeah, comprehensive.
I personally am pro conflict. I am an ex-punk rocker, and so I will just go to somebody. Does it work? Not always. But you know, you get your own personal style, and I'll be like, Priya, can we talk? And that's my preference. I don't have the discipline to work around somebody. You have to know who you are too. Like, I will give up the game at some point. I can't work around somebody. They will find out.
Well, Brad, I have a question for you then.
Yeah.
But it's 3 minutes to 7:30, so I don't know if it's a good. Can I give you my cell? Maybe we can talk on the phone after.
100%.
Okay, I'll ping it to you now.
Yeah. Listen, I just, this is my last thing. I think this is true. I also think this is false, right? We are not a team because we work together. We are a team because we respect, trust, and care for each other. That's kind of one of those wishful thinking things. Because we work together, if we work together well, we will end up respecting, trusting, and caring for each other. And it is something you hear from successful teams over and over and over again. And it doesn't matter what, it doesn't matter if it was a successful launch, a team that created a company, a team that won the Super Bowl, a team that, you know, honestly, the robotics competition, the Girl Scouts who sold the most cookies. I've been involved in all of these things, right? You gain respect for people through accomplishing things. When we would take boys camping in the snow and the ice in January, these kids are all over the map, right? Some of them are jocks, some of them are, you know, dorks, some of them are gamers, some of them are in music, right? Their parents put them in Boy Scouts. When they were done, they were so proud of what they had accomplished. And we would tell them, you just spent the weekend doing something extraordinarily difficult. No one else did. Everybody else was playing their Xbox, and you learned how to make a snow cave and you camped in 0-degree weather. Be proud of that. And you did it together. And you would see kids who actually actively disliked each other sort of begrudgingly become friends because they went through things together. So that's the last thing I want to say is all these team building exercises that we do, let's go paintballing, let's do this. They're fine. They're not actually the heart of the problem. We are not supposed to be creating, we can create friends, but we are not there to create friends. We are there to do work. The friendships are secondary. It's, can we work together? Once you learn that, that's the lesson of the Army. You know, and the Army was the first large institution integrated in the United States because everybody worked together and they realized they could work together. And they had to, right? It was that simple. Like, oh shit, you can do the job. So I do think this is true, but I also think the reverse is true. And I think if you do it the other way around, you can engineer it a little bit. Let's not start with me forcing you to like each other. The six of us just went on a journey. Now we like each other a little better because we had a good conversation. It goes the other way. That's my last point. So, listen, this was really fun. Brian, any last thoughts?
Yeah, let's go ahead and do this. Everybody, let's give Brad a big Nova Scribes thank you, and I will go ahead and turn off the recording. Thank you very much, Brad. Great having you.
Thank
Was a
you.
blast.
Thank you, Brad.